I'm just going to put this down if you don't mind. Thank you. Mark, still cool. How's your day?
It's been all right. How about you?
Not bad.
Not bad. Well, just went down.
Okay. Seething in pain. Not even joking. Okay. No, it's not your fault. Okay, so let's bring this over this way. You would throw these on just so I can keep track of this on. And oh, that's what I wanted. Okay. And throw this down here. So we can hear. Okay. You can see that?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So welcome to the second CIVL programming welcome to the second CIVL programming orientation session. It's rules and regulations. We've gone through the first general orientation. Do you have questions or thoughts that have come up since the last time we?
Not yet. No, been good so far.
Okay. So today we're going to do just a brief recap. We'll start with campus community versus commercial radio. So we talked about the differences between each of those types of radio. What do you remember? What stands out to you?
Yeah. So, well, commercial radio was the more for profit. Mostly had advertising, lots of ads that way. Then community is usually, we usually have the advertisement funding. It's either budget or crowdfunded. For us, it was student funded for the most part. Yeah, kind of that was the basis of what I remember. And then we're also mostly volunteer based with very few paid employees. Well, few paid employees, but commercial is mostly all based on paid staff. For commercial. Perspective as well with the community, because you have more volunteers, more perspective than commercial may have.
So you've named all the pieces. One, the finances. Yeah, the commercial radio relies on advertising. Campus radio stations get the student funding, and then the community has to diversify their funding. To the content, which is based on the personnel. Campus community radio stations, primarily it's volunteer driven. So those volunteers are able to put together content that is outside of what generally a commercial radio station would want to air, because the more diverse, nuanced, unique, potentially even controversial content that they have, and certainly not top of mind mainstream content, then the less likely it is that content will yield them advertising results. So very good. What about, so we've got community, which includes campus. We've got commercial, which is corporate, popular, mainstream radio. What about the public sector? Can you think of what a radio station in the public sector would look like?
Oh,
we do have public radio in Canada.
Yeah, totally. I would assume it would be similar to how we're run as well, wouldn't it be? More so volunteer based?
Well, okay, let's think about what is public. What is it for something to be public, for a public resource?
Everyone to have access, kind of.
Yeah. So, but like for us, we have everybody has access to a campus community radio station. And like to a commercial radio station, everybody has access to. True. All you have to do is tune in, right?
True. That's true.
So the public element would refer to, funding is one piece. Where do public institutions get their funding from?
Typically from taxpayers.
Right, from taxes. So what taxpayer funded radio or media entity in Canada can you think of?
Oh, I actually don't know off the top of my head.
No,
I don't.
In the UK, they have one that's very common, that's very popular, very impactful. Can you think of what the UK would have? In multiple different channels. They have it.
BBC?
Yeah, the BBC, the
Okay.
British Broadcasting Corporation, is taxpayer funded.
Oh, okay.
It's public radio. Yeah, for sure. It's
Cool.
the classic kind of westernized, democratized radio, so to speak. So it's funded by the taxpayers and thus by the government, but the government is not supposed to have direct control. So it's viewed as like a third party organization or operation. In Canada, we have like BC Hydro in the province, or BC Ferries, or CRA. All these different institutions are kind of third party. Maybe CRA isn't a good one to put into that group, but certainly, yeah, BC Hydro, BC Ferries, these are crown corporations, so they're third party corporations created by the government to administer tax funding without government partisan control. So the prime minister shouldn't be able to tell BC Ferries, or the premier shouldn't be able to just make a decision that'll impact BC Ferries without the BC Ferries commission or directorship having oversight over that. And they shouldn't be pressured by politics.
Makes sense.
So the same thing for the BBC. Most countries will have public/government radio. In a lot of smaller countries, that government, depending on what the governance structure looks like, it may be propaganda radio. Like in China or Russia, radio probably resembles more of government mouthpiece, government messaging. Certainly in like a country like North Korea, it would specifically be military messaging for the populace. And so you can debate how independent the CBC is in Canada, whether or not we truly do have separation from governance and operation. I think we do, and certainly in comparison to a lot of other countries where we see those examples. But the CBC is the Canadian public broadcaster. So yeah, Canadian Broadcast Corporation. So it's paid for by tax. It's heavily staffed and very few volunteers, probably more students than commercial radio would have, kind of doing work in the background, behind the scenes kind of business, and developing experience and whatnot, internships and practicums and co-ops and things like that. So yeah, a little bit about like a third rail of broadcast in Canada.
Yeah.
So it also gets governed and legislated by the CRTC. The CBC does. There are certain, you can complain about the CBC, and the CRTC will review those complaints and sanction accordingly, or not, depending on how they feel about the complaint. And the CRTC will also legislate, can the CBC advertise and how? Or should it just be providing a public service without drawing in additional revenues? If we see the Conservatives reelected, we'll likely see funding of the CBC go down. Their reliance on advertising dollars being more significant or required to them. And yeah, the CRTC would have to provide a legislative framework that supports their shift in that operation, if that were the case. We talked last time about a little bit about content requirements in terms of we can only play 10% hits on a campus community radio station. Do we talk about the exception to what kind of hit we can play more than 10% of the time?
We didn't.
We did not?
No.
If a song is Canadian and it's been a hit for less than a year, we can play it without going over that hits quota. Okay. So this 10% hits quota is not relevant to Canadian music released that's been a hit for the last year. So if it's been a hit for a year and a day, then it does count against the 10%. And if it's not Canadian, it counts against the 10%. But if it's Canadian within the last year, it doesn't count within the 10%. The government wants to support, and the government wants to support and encourage Canadian artists to be more successful. So that's why they are not caught within the 10% hit guideline. But also it is why we have what we know as CanCon, Canadian content, which we'll talk about more in depth shortly. We talked about the structure of CIVL, what with board being the ownership, staff being paid to administer, foster, and support the volunteers who we should be providing most of our services to focus towards. And then we talked about the NCRA and the CRTC. So the NCRA, do we remember what these acronyms stand for? either of them, or what the organizations themselves do?
National Canadian Radio Association? No, National Community Radio Association.
Yeah, and it should be two C's, Community and Campus
Community and Campus.
Radio Association, the NCRA, and then this would be
Canadian Radio Television.
Yeah, there's another one there. It's commission. So it is a commission. It's Canadian Radio, Television, and again should have two T's, and telecommunications commission. So that's why, the CRTC is responsible for, like we said last time, but whatever operations that telecom companies undertake, how much they can charge for their services, what kinds of services they have to provide, and how those function. And of course, today, the governance of news entities on social media and on Google. Currently, the CRTC is working on legislation that they hope will avoid Google and Meta completely blocking Canadian news sources, which they're doing right now. Will they be successful? Doesn't seem like it. Date stamp, October 18th, 2023. Not hopeful.
Will they be successful?
Yeah, who knows? Supposedly by December, Google will also. So Facebook and Instagram right now are blocking Canadian news content. Supposedly by December or so, Google may do exactly the same.
That's interesting.
Well, by the same mechanism that Facebook has decided to do so, Google is making the same argument. They're just having a longer lead up. So I think that would be incredibly disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely.
The impact on CIVL that we can't share on social media is, it's almost like untold impact in terms of how you can engage and promote. So to additionally not be available through Google searches, like that would mean you could not Google the radio station.
Yeah, that's the thing. That seems completely just disruptive.
So, problematic for us.
Yeah, problematic.
So Canadian content, we have to play a certain amount of Canadian content in the music we play. It is only relevant or relative to music. So spoken word content does not have Canadian designation or not. It has local designation for each community and campus radio station. Although that's actually not too relevant now. That there was a point where we had to have 25%. No, so it is more relevant. We used to have 25% 25% spoken word content as a whole on a campus community radio station. Now we have to have 15% spoken word content as a whole, but it should be local spoken word content. And what does local mean? Local means it's put together locally for this station. It's not something we imported from another station. It's something that volunteers created for CIVL. That's what creates local spoken word content. But as far as music goes, there's a specific percentage of Canadian content that every broadcaster in Canada, including the CBC, including commercials, including campus community radio stations, have to follow through with. They have to play a certain percentage. Do you have an idea of what that percentage is?
Wasn't it like 40?
It's a little less than 40.
A little less than 40.
So it's 35%.
Oh, okay.
So that's, depending on what kind of music we play, it actually will change. But I'm recording the audio, but I'm not screen sharing. I just realized. So you know what? I'm going to start screen sharing. Too little, too late.
It's okay.
Well, says you. I'm gonna have to edit this off another later. Jeez.
That's true.
Let's do this again another time. So depending on what kind of content you have, you may not be required to fulfill the full 35% of Canadian content for music. And so the way we determine that is everything on the radio has a number associated with it. If you're talking, that number will start with a 1. If you're playing popular music, that number will start with a 2. That's the category 2 here for 35%. If you're playing music that qualifies as specialty genres, then that number will start with a 3, and you'll only have to play 12% Canadian content because it's specialty music. So just like the government wants to encourage and foster playing of new Canadian music that is popular, they want to encourage that you play specialty music, even if it's harder to find Canadian content. So they lower the percentage of Canadian content you have to find because that music is more unique, more niche. Now, we may disagree if the music is niche when we look at what exactly is qualified for Category 3 specialty music and what is not. We'll talk about that shortly. Maybe not shortly, but later in the session.
Cool.
If your music is not either English or French or an Indigenous language, that would make it third language, and we only have to play 7% Canadian content. So if you're playing Turkish music, Spanish music, Swedish music, Swahili music, it would be difficult, again, to find Canadian content for that. So we only have to find less than 1 in 10 Canadian selections from that type of music. And it isn't specifically, so we don't have different categories for different languages. So presumably if you were playing a third language program, you wouldn't have to necessarily find Canadian content in that language. You could find it in a different language.
That's cool.
But the point being that this is what the government expects from the different content categories. And now that doesn't mean that it's required that your program provide those numbers, these statistics. If, let's say, you want to put together a program and you believe it would be very challenging or restrictively so for you to have to abide by whatever Canadian content requirement there is for that content, that style of music, the programming committee will consider if you want an exemption from Canadian content, or let's say you're doing music, and it's technically popular category, but 35 you can't do, 20% you could do, and you're willing to do that, then we will discuss and consider that. Not everybody will be necessarily approved, but different programs can make different applications to be able to administer what they want to program effectively. So how do we determine whether or not a piece of music is Canadian? And we have a little system, an acronym called MAPLE. It's the MAPLE system for maple leaf, maple music, Canadian music. MAPL are the 4 categories that exist within which a certain portion of the Canadianness of a song can be determined. So can we think about what these letters may stand for in terms of pieces of parts of a piece of music that make it Canadian or not?
I've seen this again before in that class, but I don't remember.
So, well, what do you think? What do you think in general would go into whether or not a piece of music was Canadian? What would you suggest would be a way to identify Canadianness or not?
Written by a Canadian, made in Canada, talking about Canada.
Okay, so written by a Canadian. So what would they write?
Oh, what they write.
So generally for copyright, we think of two aspects of the music that we can be participating in, either writing the lyrics, L is the lyrics, or composing the music, M. So, the Beatles, I always refer to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, where it's Lennon and McCartney, Jagger and Richards. One wrote the music, one wrote the lyrics. Maybe they collaborated on either or both. But for those songwriting duos, we know Keith Richards played the guitar for the Rolling Stones. He composed the music, and Mick Jagger wrote all the words and sang all the words. So music and lyrics are 2 of the 4. A, can we think of an A?
Wow.
Or again, another element, the writing was spot on, right? And in fact, it hit off 2 of the birds with 1 stone. M and L. What about, so A is artist. Who is the artist who is on this recording? Who are we hearing record the music? And essentially anybody who's participating in the recording who is Canadian, if they're making a significant contribution to that recording, that will satisfy. So you could just have 1 Canadian member in the group, if it was a group of 10 people, and if that member was making a significant contribution to the recording, it could be considered Canadian content. So music, artist, lyrics, and actually for this 4-part acronym, That's all we need out of the four M, A, and L. They, over the past year, it's almost exactly a year now, like I said, October 18th, 2023, that they determined that P is no longer going to count. And you said something else earlier. Where was it produced? So yeah, P stood for performance. And where was that recording made?
Yeah.
But today people are postal servicing their recordings, right? They're doing it online, and they're in different continents and hemispheres, and they're sharing it digitally. And so the government decided, that's my understanding, is that led to the government deciding, you know what, performance, where it's recorded, that doesn't matter anymore. We're going to lose a lot of Canadian content from artists that have recorded pieces that aren't in Canada. Is I think where they were coming from. The concern here is that, so if you were a drummer, let's say, so the A was satisfied, but you were playing like jazz standards live at a Canadian club, and that was recorded, or at a concert hall or something, then artist and performance would both be Canadian, but you're doing like Miles Davis songs, or jazz standards where the music and lyrics are not Canadian. We need two of these four in order to satisfy a piece of music as Canadian. So if a Canadian only wrote the lyrics, or only is the performer, or only wrote the music, then it's not sufficient to meet CanCon requirements. It can't contribute to the 7, 12, or 35%. You need two of these four, but now two of the three. That doesn't include performance. And so that means that jazz drummer who made a performance in Canada, and who has a recording of a performance that they did in Canada, that will no longer be able to count as Canadian content unless music or lyrics are also written by a Canadian. So people have argued on the NCRA listserv, which we went over in the last session, the email list where we talked throughout amongst ourselves throughout the country, that it deprioritizes performers who played non-Canadian music live but were getting Canadian plays. Let's say in this case on a jazz station that would play, the Canadian jazz band's performance of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue front to back. All of those selections would have been eligible for Canadian content on jazz radio before, but now they're not. And so if they were getting played before, they won't be now, most likely because they'll have to replace that content with Canadian content, which for a jazz radio station for category 3, spoiler alert, would be 12%, not 35%. Jazz is one of those specialty music genres. Questions about Canadian content?
No, looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. Music, artist, performance, lyrics.
Yes. And now it's just the MAL system.
MAL.
It's the SAD system now. It's no longer the Maple system. That's where Canada's entertainment and industry is going, to MAL. So okay, a little bit of giggles, but we're going to go to we're going to step into serious business. So rules and regulations, and it can get kind of heavy at the start here, because we're going to talk about our zero tolerance policy. And what our zero tolerance policy focuses on off the top is any form of abuse, harassment, or discrimination, whether it's verbal, physical, or sexual harassment, abuse, or discrimination. It'll be addressed. It'll be treated with zero tolerance. Infracting upon this expectation of no abuse, harassment, and discrimination, verbal, physical, or sexual, will lead to immediate dismissal from the station. And so we generally will go through in order to identify what exactly is, or how can we ensure when we're experiencing harassment, abuse, or discrimination, what does it look like? How can we avoid it? We go through this for two reasons. It's our anti-oppression training module. That basically we want to show volunteers that, look, this is behavior that you should not have to face at the station. For one, we expect in other places as well, but we're only responsible for this space, this engagement, this organization, but also how we expect each of us to treat others. So it's both to protect us and to let us know what we expect in terms of conduct. So the first thing we talk about is that we want to value diversity. As far as discrimination goes, it's really important. And of course, we hear lots over the last several years, certainly since the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, about diversity, inclusion, and equity. Maybe we started hearing about it a little more during the Me Too movement in 2016, when women's rights became more of a populist issue, I guess, is how you could look at it. Or maybe not women's rights, but just the right to not be mistreated in the workplace, basically, or not even in the workplace, but in general. What we want to talk about at CIVL is to encourage people to recognize that. So we talk a lot about tolerance, or I remember we used to talk a lot about tolerance. I think people have kind of stepped back from the tolerance concept in the last several years. But tolerating our differences is certainly like something we must do. And so tolerance is a good thing in that way, but we don't want to stop at tolerance. So if we're only tolerating our differences, if we're saying, you know, we want different people to come to the table, but then we want them to be the same, and we want them to assimilate, and we want them to leave their differences and their backgrounds, their histories, their cultures, their uniquenesses at the door, what we're really engaging in is erasure of those differences, those cultures, those backgrounds, those experiences. So what we want is, we want to value our differences. We want to share them. We want to celebrate them. We want everybody to come in the door and bring their diversity with them, and to be not only tolerated, but valued, and to be included. That's what an inclusive world looks like. So that's just a broad kind of introduction to that discussion. What we generally do is we'll say we'll ask about allyship. It's a term that we hear a lot about. I think lately, you're familiar with allyship? What does it mean to you?
Just valuing every person for who they are. Basically, it's being a support system for some people. It's understanding. It's just understanding. I guess to me, really, it's understanding and supporting other people.
Yeah, I guess allyship to a degree is the verbal or the overt recognition that others, that not me but others, I support, basically. Yeah. So yeah, we'll say I'm a queer ally. I'm not a queer person, but I support the cause of inclusivity, that for which we celebrate pride, and we want to encourage different sexual identities or sexual different sexualities in general. Yeah. So to be an ally is mostly we look at as, well, yeah, I'm just going to say that I support this, and I'm going to vocally provide my support. Have you heard of the term accomplice?
Not in the circumstance.
Not in the diversity world. So we think of accompliship as very much like, in a court of law, if you're an accomplice, I assisted in the robbery, or I was an accomplice after the fact. I helped to hide the person after the robbery. In the diversity context, we think of accompliship as, so I'm an ally and I support the pride cause, but here now I want to be an accomplice. I want to make sure I'm going past allyship, where I'm seeing things. I'm not only just recognizing that that's wrong, that this gender discrimination or whatever it is, this discrimination over somebody's sexuality is wrong, but I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something. I'm going to take a step in order to move forward the cause that I'm an ally towards. And so here it's defined as a responsible and ethical use of privilege and power. So if we are allying ourselves with those who require allyship, then in doing so, I'm kind of recognizing I have privilege and power by, let's say in my case, being a heterosexual person that doesn't have to face the discrimination of queer identities. So I have privilege there, and I have power in my heterosexual circles, where I can influence the impact on queer communities. And I should be looking at that responsibly and ethically if I want to be an accomplice. We want to encourage people to be accomplices. And so we want people to think about what their privilege and power is. So here, these 4 steps, or these 8 steps rather, which are not like a 1, 2, 8 step map, so to speak, but it's 8 ways that we can work towards being effective accomplices. So it will require us to grapple with our own privileges and understand how they impact our blind spots. So this is the part in the session where I'll list off a number of my privileges of being, you know, a heterosexual person that doesn't feel like they were born in a body that doesn't reflect the gender that they identify with. You know, I'm a man at that. I'm a white presenting man at that. I'm able-bodied, right? Like I don't have any physical circumstances that keep me from being able to walk, or at this time, at least in my life. So yeah, all of these privileges that I have give me power, give me also blank spots. I'm not able to necessarily, or I may be able to, but I will probably have to work harder to recognize, well, if I was a person of color, if I was, you know, using a wheelchair to get around, if I was, you know, a foot shorter than I am, how would my life be impacted by that in ways that, as a person with all of those privileges, all that power, I don't recognize. So those are my blank spots. I can think about, well, if it wasn't me, who I am, how would it impact me or a person? And that's really important, I think, in terms of how we treat one another, and how we create spaces and how we create organizations and systems for people to participate in too. So once we do that, if we're recognizing our power, our privilege, understanding how they impact our blind spots, then hopefully we can also recognize the harm caused by privileged people like ourselves, now and historically. So yeah, well, the world's been made for tall people, or it's been made for men, or it's been made for white people, and here are the ways we can see the systems that support the tall people, the men, the white people, whatever it is, people who don't have addictions, whatever it is, that we can see that there are ways that that changes can be made. And so that requires for us to take a step back and reflect often, to be able to not kind of be emotionally impacted by what we recognize in such a way that it upsets us, makes us unwilling to engage, makes us turn away from the idea of being an inclusive space or working on inclusive spaces. So this requires us to kind of know when to speak up and when not to, and not that we should just know, but we should work on considering and making those decisions. So if I'm a straight person and I participate with the Pride Committee, it's probably important for the voices of queer folk in that committee to be elevated, rather than me, the heterosexual person who's participating in that committee, saying, you know, this is what you really need, or what we really need. And queer folk are saying, actually, yeah, our communities are impacted by this. We need this. It's nice that you are coming from the outside and wanting to help, but you're misguided in the way that that you're trying to engage in this group. Or maybe not. Maybe people wouldn't even say that. But as a person who's recognizing my power and my privilege, I want to recognize that I want to follow those voices. So knowing when to speak up and when not to, when the room needs to be provided, when people in the room need to be provided scaffolding to share their perspectives and opinions. Maybe it's less relevant even in the queer group, but when we're not in a queer group, and I know I'm a heterosexual person, and there are queer folk at the table whose voices should be heard, or when I'm a man and there's women at the table, or when I'm a person, I'm a white presenting person and there are people of color at the table, or people who speak the primary language here as a second language, those other voices we should be looking to follow their leadership, and we should be looking to provide, the term I've heard is a scaffolding for others to participate. We don't have to, you know, it's not always about asking this person or encouraging that person to make their voices heard, or necessarily advocating for everybody to follow through with what this or that person said, but being encouraging, creating a scaffolding, creating an infrastructure and an environment where people feel open to sharing their voices, they feel like their input's going to be heard, and that you're building on what people are saying when their voices, maybe, you know, a meek person, maybe they're just a shy person, regardless of what their identities are, could be a heterosexual white guy of high economic status, and is just not a very bold, assertive person, but they have ideas. Those ideas often don't get expanded upon. As somebody else in that meeting, I can provide a scaffolding where their input is built on, and that as a group we can follow those leads. So, looking around the room, who's participating, whose voices being heard, whose voices are not being heard yet, and how can we bring those out, and how can we build on that together so that everybody's ideas are considered, and again, we're taking that leadership from marginalized groups in particular. So sometimes that requires that we sacrifice our individual comfort for collective liberation. So we think about, and this connects with restructuring how we distribute our resources. Obviously, there's instances where in the States, reparations for slavery, for that's something where it's a restructure of resources. Many anti-oppressive advocates would say it's essential. It's making up for the ills of the past, the atrocities of the past. In Canada, we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We have the residential school. Don't want to call it a legacy, but the impacts left by the residential school program and the harm done. And of course, the government has already, there are different levels of redistribution of funding that's going back, that kind of reparations for the harm caused to those families and those people. And there's also instances where they don't want to pay money back. There's like a $40 billion payout that the feds are trying to avoid right now. Maybe those numbers are a little wrong. But ultimately, what this all kind of requires is an equitable lens that frequently picks up on intricacies of anti-oppression and imagines inclusive alternatives. So I put on my social scientist hat here, and I say, when we're learning about different political perspectives in school, sometimes we're asked, well, so what does the Durkheim perspective lend to us? How would a communist, how would a feminist, how would a capitalist perspective see this situation? And we look at what different lenses we can interpret an event or a system through, and we want to encourage people to look at things in general from an anti-oppressive lens. So to say that, like, I am in every situation I'm in, here are my privileges, here's the ways that I have power here, and here are some disadvantages that others might have that I can make a difference in. And that's what we want to encourage overall. This is not like a how-to, you must be doing this 8 things all the time when you volunteer at CIVL Radio. But when it comes to, oh, well, I didn't know that was discriminatory, or I didn't know that somebody could feel disrespected by this, that, or the other, which is something that comes up constantly now in every institution, in almost every communal group. People want to speak their mind, people want to have fun, do their thing, and then they're upset. Oh, somebody got offended by that, they feel, or, oh, things are so wild these days, I can't do A, B, or C, or D because it's inappropriate. Well, I think if we do a lot of this, if we do all these things, I think it'll be a lot easier for us to come to common ground on those pieces, because we'll understand where everybody else is coming from, and we'll be prepared to reevaluate where we're at and not get so frustrated when we're told that, oh, actually, there's something that somebody has an issue with here. So we'll move on from talking about accompliceship in particular, and we'll talk about the staircase of oppression. So we're going to go up and we're going to go down the staircase. So it starts with equality. We want to provide equality. It actually ends with equality. We don't have equality. We want to work towards it. We want everybody to have an equal opportunity, regardless of their identity, their background. And we want to show each other solidarity. So to show each other solidarity, in showing each other solidarity, we want to provide experiences that are coming from the same starting point. We want everybody to have again that equality of experience. So it means that our beliefs, we know our beliefs are rooted in stereotypes much of the time. We can't really help that. We want to break that down. We can't help it without thinking about it, without putting in work. We can help it ultimately. And if we're believing in equity together, we're valuing it together, then we're able to root prejudice or recognize what our prejudices are. And we all have them. It's not a sin to have prejudices. It's a challenge to recognize them, but when we do, we can undo our stereotypes and have people step into experiences where they're able to have the same experience no matter who they are, or that they'll have the same starting point from which to experience things. And this is really what's inherent in allyship, is trying to avoid and undo prejudices. We need to take actions when we recognize discrimination. And we also have to have awareness in order to recognize that discrimination. And so those positions where we have power, if we can have awareness of what leads to discrimination, then we can take action. We can be allies that will start to break down prejudices because of the values that we recognize we can share, of each of us wanting an equitable space together, so that we don't come into a situation focusing on our stereotypes, so that we can break down those inherent beliefs about who one another are, and instead show solidarity to each other in all the experiences we have together, and find a space of equality. So often folks will react defensively, but, oh, this is a bunch of phooey. I don't need this. This is difficult. This is coming out of nowhere. This is some woke garbage is what people may think. They'll be deflective, or, you just want me to, I don't have to do this. You're just trying to, people talk about the indoctrination right now. Let's say if it's about queer identities, you're indoctrinating people to be queer, which is just kind of, to me, a deflection of wanting to do the work to accept people who are different from me. You're presumptive of, oh, well, you're trying to harm me for being a man or for being white or something like this, or they're disingenuous. And we see a lot of virtue signaling going around, and a lot of organizations, oil companies talking about how hard they work for the environment and things like this. So we want to avoid these kinds of behaviors, but we also know that many people will react like this. There's nothing we can do about it, and we can just stay encouraged by what we're trying to accomplish and what we're doing. Were we familiar with the term microaggressions?
Yeah, I would say so.
And how would you describe microaggression?
Kind of maybe under the umbrella of passive aggressive, small kind of comments here and there that add up to being a little bit aggressive.
So the description here, and it was coined by Dr. Chester Middleburg Pierce in I think of the 80s or so. But the description here is, they're subtle, insidious aggressions that are either unintentional or intentional. So it doesn't have to be on purpose. And they often recur. They don't have to recur, but they often recur. They dismiss, they isolate, they belittle, and they other individuals, particularly on the basis of marginal identities. So yeah, it doesn't have to be on purpose. It depends on how kind of small it is. It can be a bigger piece, and it can just seem like it's a small thing. We're going to go over a list of things that should give us a broad range of ideas. And this is along the kind of abuse or harassment, and in terms of, there are some discrimination pieces too. But generally, like, these are examples of how we can broadly identify most of the ways to not behave based on this. So rude gestures or comments, sometimes we're just joking around with one another and we say things, but that can be done. That can be harmful. So I mean, we don't want to be taking for granted that we can be casual and colloquial with one another, and then when we overreact about things and get frustrated, it can be insulting, it can be offensive, and it can be scary depending on who we are. If your boss is always swearing when they're upset, that can mean any number of things. But if you're if there's more elements than just a boss, a superior, an employee relationship, let's say if it's a man as a boss and there's a woman who is the employee, or maybe it's only certain employees that get that swearing or that behavior. That's really that can be very problematic. Physical violence, obviously, we're not punching each other, and if we are, that's illegal and unacceptable. But there's others more subtle ways that people can engage in physical violence. Maybe it's in the hallway, somebody kind of like just walks down the hallway and bumps into you. There's an element of, again, just like the comments, and like a lot of the things I'm talking about, like you may think that's not really, that's not an aggressive, violent move, but I'm ignoring you, I'm disrespecting you, all these different pieces. If I'm swearing, if I'm getting upset in front of you, well, where's my thought process as a manager of your comfort level, your safety? If I'm walking down the hall and bumping into people, that's just like, I should be paying attention to who's there. And if I'm not, perhaps I'm purposefully not, right? I'm dismissing you and just bumping past you. Sexual advances are inappropriate in the workplace, obviously. Or is it obvious? I don't know. I hear about lots of stories about people getting married, they met at work. And I wonder, like, okay, it's a difficult world to kind of make sense of sometimes. But yeah, I think a lot of people will take those anecdotal instances and think, oh yeah, well, in the workplace, whatever, it's just like anywhere else. But it's not. We're not here to mate or to be romantic. We're here to do work. And when you're making advances on somebody else, it's dehumanizing them. It's taking them out of the workplace. They're here for the workplace. They're not here for relationship development in a romantic sense. Objectifying them. Verbal threats are obviously inappropriate and unacceptable of any type. Slurs and jokes about identity. We can think about all sorts of terms that people use, jokes that people make off people. Oh, my friend is gay. Oh, my friend is black. Oh, my uncle is whatever. And I can make this joke because of that. That's never okay. Touching without consent. So there's no type of touching that is appropriate in the workplace. I'm sure we all know the person who they talk to you, and every time they say something, the hand goes on the knee, or like every time somebody comes up from behind you, they put the hand on the shoulder. Just a very casual interaction. And yeah, that's not appropriate in the workplace, period. So, if it comes to the point, if there's any more touching, there should be no confusion or debate, because we've gone through this. It says no touching without consent is acceptable. So there's no, it was just this, or it was just that. It was without consent, and thus it was inappropriate. So those are some more obvious types of microaggressions that we can encounter. There's some covert ones, like lack of promotion or leadership opportunity. So if you're doing the same work as others, and others are providing the same or higher quality of work or others, and you're not getting promoted or getting leadership opportunities, that could be a microaggression. It could be on purpose, in other words, because of your identity or because discrimination. So flirting, it doesn't rise to the level of sexual advances, but again, it's taking you out of you're a person in the workplace who I'm trying to be professional with, and turning you into, again, subjectifying a person. And it can go both ways, men, women. It's not gender exclusive. Dead naming. If somebody tells us that their identity is this or that, if they're a man, if they're a woman, if they want to be identified without a gender normative pronoun, then that's up to them. We won't refer to them as we were used to referring to them before that happened. That's savage is a phrase. Can we think of, do we know why that can be a problematic phrase? Savage? What's your experience, or how do you recognize that term?
Yeah, well, typically that one, actually, when do people use that one? Well, it would relate to Indians, so of course Aboriginal, of course, and
Right.
that would be taking that out of context and using that in an inappropriate way.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess a lot of people would say that there is really no out of context to it. It's
Yeah.
just it's a word that
It's
that
not
was
a good
used to describe Indigenous folk.
Yeah.
Yeah, when colonial settling was first taking place, and throughout the period where it did, yeah, Indigenous folks were referred to. Well, the Indigenous people were on the land, and Europeans wanted to develop and live on that land, and they were encroaching on the space of Indigenous folk, and basically the cultural practices were different, and that was an excuse and opportunity for Europeans to say, well, those people are savages, they are subhuman, they are not civilized, and we must kill them, or we thus can kill them, because they don't deserve respect or rights or humanity the way we recognize it. And so, yeah, when we continue to use the term savage today, especially when it's in the context of, yeah, that was of it being something, we hear it colloquially today, very casually, as, oh, you were aggressive or assertive or completely dominant of something. What a great job you did by being savage. Demi Lovato has it in a song of, that's what a badass person I am. And it's just, that's not that we don't want to celebrate the language. And when an Indigenous person hears that, and not everybody might feel that way. Not every Indigenous person might feel that way, but I can certainly understand how a person would. Generally, yeah. We think of it as being an inclusive language. Touching hair. So depending on your cultural background, some people may find your hair particularly interesting to touch, apparently, when you do it, like wear your hair in certain ways. So that's something that lots of people experience. It's been a thing for probably as long as there's been multiculturalism in North America. And yeah, it makes people feel uncomfortable. Like, why are you turning my hair into something for you to touch? It's me, my body. And yeah, the calling attention to it being different than your hair maybe is something that could be, or not maybe, but that can be uncomfortable. So it's not flirting, and it's not sexual advances necessarily. Like, it could be flirting. It sounds like flirting to me, but whatever. Questions about relationships or sex are inappropriate in the workplace. It's really none of anybody's businesses what your colleagues' relationships or sex life looks like. It has to do with, it's totally up to them. And yeah, the governor of New York stepped down last year because he felt it was appropriate to constantly be asking his interns about their sex life and their relationships. Do you have a boyfriend? How's that going? These kinds of things. Which is not to say, it's not to discourage people from getting to know one another, right? But people can do that in a way that is self-directed rather than being prodded at for their personal internal information. If I offer up that I have a wife, or that me and my girlfriend, this or that and the other, I'm putting that out there. We can talk about it, sure. But I shouldn't be prodded, and I shouldn't be prodding others to explain or to bring up their own, to disclose their personal situation. Misuse of pronouns, very similar to dead naming. Beyond the name, we'll refer to person as the gender that they would like to be referred to, not what we're comfortable with necessarily. There's no reason we shouldn't be comfortable with however a person wants to be pronounced. Stereotyping in all sorts of ways. We can think of a million different types of stereotypes, and we want to avoid that judgment, that expectation. Again, you're in the wrong bathroom. Just terms that are similar. That I didn't misgender you, but I'm presuming who you are, what your identity is, putting you in a situation where you have to A, disclose, B, justify, C, defend your identity and how you feel. Tone policing, depending on, I think specifically, and I've heard a lot of instances where like a woman of color will be told the way that you're speaking, or we hear about it in the American she is a woman of color, Nikki Haley, or she's a woman with biracial background. But where a man would have been described as being strong and assertive, the woman is described, oh, she's very shrill, she's very bossy. So we want to focus on what people are saying rather than the style of speech. Different people from different cultural backgrounds have different cultural identities that lead to their kind of manner of speaking being different. And we want everybody to feel like it's the substance of what we're talking about. We want to recognize it is the substance of what we're talking about rather than judging their kind of their outward behavior. Misuse of social media. So I specifically talk about like vague booking here. You familiar with the term vague booking? No. So vague booking, like you and I and someone else are all on the same social media platform. Obviously it's modeled after Facebooking, vague booking. And like we have a day at work where we work together a lot, and maybe it's frustrating, maybe it isn't, who knows. But then I go home and I post on my social media. Don't you hate it when you work with people at work and it's like this? And I don't name a person. I don't say what we were doing. I don't really give any details. I'm just like, obviously, Aaron is annoyed, and he's annoyed with the people he worked with, and I'm the person he worked with all day. So like, clearly he was upset about something, and probably he gives more specific examples that only I would recognize and nobody else. And so I can go into work tomorrow knowing that Aaron not only is upset about something he didn't bring up with me, but like he did feel like he wanted to complain about it to his social media followers and let everybody know. So that will create an uncomfortable environment at work. That will create, it's a form of bullying, I would say. And so that is just one specific example of how we can misuse social media. Maybe it's not a post, maybe it's a comment, maybe we're making a joke on somebody. Oh, you weren't meant to see that. I can post on my friend's wall. No, you can't about somebody at work if you're trying to be respectful and cooperative and whatnot, and keep people's confidence as well. So yeah, we won't post it on social media about the inner workings of the radio station. We won't complain about the organization or people in the organization. And if we do have concerns, complaints, issues, we'll deal with them internally and directly. If you have a problem with a volunteer or a function of the station, then the staff are there to deal with it. If you have a problem with the co-op student or the program manager, who right now is Taryn, then I'm the supervisor of Taryn. If you have a problem with me, then the board of directors is responsible for disciplining, penalizing, whatever, managing station management. If you don't like what the board of directors did, you can appeal to the board of directors after you've exhausted all those means. Then, if you really hate CIVL Radio, I guess there's nothing to stop you from going on social media and talking about that. But until that point, I'd say if you want to still participate in the organization, then yeah, airing that information would be misuse. Tokenism. Are you familiar with the term tokenism?
Possibly. I'm assuming it's when you hire someone just to fill a role, basically like a diversity requirement, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Really hiring or engaging people. The idea is that, yeah, exactly. We want, tokenism is necessary to a degree in certain circumstances. That's a soundbite that somebody will use against me one day in the future. He said tokenism is good. So I'm familiar with a diversity philosophy that says, so if you want people to be, hi, what are you looking for? Just leave it there. I'll put it up. Thank you. Yeah, great. No problem. So if you want to be an inclusive, culturally diverse organization, or diverse organization in general, tokenism, the idea of seeking people specifically who represent specific groups, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, unless you don't plan to work with them in good faith and follow their lead. If I want to recruit women or queer folk or people of color or people from specific backgrounds, there's nothing wrong with that, but to have them only as a token is what what really the problem is. To have them involved just for the persona of saying we're no longer only white, we have Nabil here who isn't white, okay, so leave us alone. We have this Indigenous person here, so yeah, we are representative of Indigenous folk, but like, are you following Nabil's direction? Are you following that Indigenous person's direction? Are they like engaging in the organization in such a way that you've provided them agency? That's really important. So you do want to make, if you're an all-white group, I would say you should. If you're an all-male group, you should tokenize these people, but also elevate and provide them agency and follow their leadership, all those things together, in which case it's not tokenism, it's diversity. It's going back to the top, it's going to that inclusion, that valuing their differences, valuing all of our differences, and engaging and engaging people regardless of their identities and their backgrounds. Yeah, when it's just, oh, but we need somebody on the diversity committee who's not white, that sounds like tokenism to me. Even if it's like, oh, we need somebody to lead the diversity organization, and since you're not white, we'd like you to do that. Okay, well, what work am I doing in this diversity organization? Can I recruit other non-white people to this diversity organization, or is it just going to be me getting told by a bunch of white people that I'm calling them racist and they want me to stop? The term "all lives matter" can be harmful. Well, I think it's created for the purpose of harm, to be honest, or maybe not created for the purpose, but out of a perspective that is pretty harmful. Black Lives Matter is a movement that aroused because Black people have been demonstrated to that their lives don't matter as much to the institutions, and so reacting to that by saying, oh, well, let's not focus on Black lives specifically because all lives are what matters, that's really insulting and dehumanizing of the people who support that Black Lives Matter cause and who recognize its meaning. So yeah, we may say, oh, come on, freedom of speech, I can say anything I want, and that it's true, we should have freedom of speech, but we need to be respectful of one another. Cultural appropriation is something, Halloween is coming up here at this recording, and yeah, we think of cultural appropriation, we think of when it was really topical that people were dressing up as Indigenous folk with the quote unquote Pocahontas costumes and whatnot. And that can be really offensive and upsetting to people of different cultural identities if they see their cultures represented by folks not part of that culture, and just performatively, or not even performatively, just for fun, treating my culture as fun for you who are not part of that culture, can be really harmful and frustrating and upsetting. And just harmful language in general. If I'm, kind of rude gestures or comments, like if I'm always using body parts as swear words around staff, that can be not a friendly environment to be in. It can be uncomfortable, and it can be intimidating potentially. So I don't want to be doing that. So these are a number of ways that we can be discriminatory, that we can harass people using this behavior repeatedly, that people can feel taken advantage of, or just make them not want to participate in our organization. So yeah, any thoughts or questions about all this?
No, it's
kind of just like an intro to potentially offensive behaviors, right?
exactly.
So I was given this session, or I participated in a session by Macau Consulting. Will Schelling led that session, and I abridged these notes from that session. If you'd like to be in touch, I'm sure he or they would love to hear from you, either Macau in general or Will specifically. And they do great work, and I think it's a really valuable tool. So that gives us a little bit. Oh, that's what I was doing the other day. There we go. Okay. So now we have other rules that, so yeah, if we harass or discriminate against people, if we abuse one another, then we'll be punished by immediate dismissal. Maybe somebody complains about something that we've talked about being perpetrated, and there's dispute. So the immediate dismissal does not mean no matter what, any accusation will lead to dismissal. It means that if we investigate and find that somebody has a valid claim of abuse, harassment, and discrimination, then we will dismiss the person responsible. But of course, you have the opportunity to appeal, and a decision won't be final until we've discussed it at the highest level. But station property, so will stay at the station. So property that's taken from the station without approval could be punished by immediate dismissal. So staff, myself, Taryn, our program manager, can approve for station equipment to be lent out, and we may do so on occasion. We always want to report damage. Accidents happen, and that's okay. I understand that. Everybody has to live with that. But the idea is that as long as you let us know that something is broken. If this microphone is broken in this session, or let's say I wasn't here and 2 volunteers were here right now, they broke the microphone, Bill's show is up next. If nobody told me that the microphone was broken, Bill's going to have problems hosting a show. And so I just want to know when something breaks so I can look into replacing it. If I don't, if I'm not told, if nobody tells me, then I won't be able to take care of it. And the person who, if we can find out who broke what and didn't let us know, then we may suspend them or terminate their volunteerism. Don't touch what you don't know how to use. Primarily, we're here in the main studio. There's a rack next to the studio board that we want to be really careful with. It could put us off air. And we'll show you how to use everything that you should use. Misrepresentation. So I talked about that social media piece earlier about, behavior on social media. In general, misrepresentation refers to anything that reflects poorly on the station broadly in the public. So it's a media entity. If you want to be involved in the media entity, you'll have to accept that, the public sphere is where media participates in. And so our participation in the public sphere is necessarily tied to our engagement with the radio station. This is a whole cancel culture conversation, possibly, if one wants it to be. So if I say this, if you were going out in public and shouting racial slurs and things, and it didn't have anything to do with the station, could it have to do with your volunteerism at the station if people noticed that and recognized? Yes, it could potentially. It's a media organization, and you're in the media doing inappropriate things. But I don't want to police everybody's behavior outside of the radio station. We want to focus it primarily on what we do with regards to the radio station. Within that context, so we want to be clear about what our role is at the station. If we're a volunteer, for a programmer host, we're a volunteer. We don't work at the station. We're not paid by the station. We're not unless we have a contract role or some other staff position. When we participate in events, like let's say we set up a booth at a festival or something, we're interacting respectfully and appropriately with other booths, with the people who come to our booth, with the organizers of the festival. People like to, I'm involved in this organization. You don't know who I am. You don't know who we are. This kind of behavior, disagreeing with folk and causing trouble, is unideal. Even if you feel like you're caused trouble with, we want to address it respectfully, appropriately. We want people to, like, let's say if you go to if you see a band this weekend in Vancouver somewhere and they have a CD, I want you to be able to say, hey, volunteering at the campus radio station in Abbotsford. If you give me your CD, I can play it on the radio. That'd be great. I'd love to use it in my demo or my program or whatever. Love it. Yeah, that's great. We want you to do that all the time. So this is not to say that, like, don't go out there and make a fool of us by existing. No, just when you are out there and talking about and promoting the station, I want you to be respectful and appropriate and professional about it, and honest. So you're not telling that band that you saw who you want to get a CD from, if you give me the CD, I'll make sure you chart #1, because that's not within your purview to do. So yeah, pieces like this, we just want to be respectful and appropriate, and represent the station the best that we can. In the studio, we won't have food or drinks in studio 1 here for sure. Water bottle with the cap on is okay. No amount of people are eating in the second studio where there isn't the equipment, that's okay. Keep the noise levels down when you're outside of the studio, like in the hallways and stuff. Because the studios are not completely soundproofed, so we can't hear from the hallways, but also like the hallways outside the studio, like the atrium, the seats over here, there's students, there are people meeting, students studying, maybe even classes going on, meetings taking place. So we want to make sure we respect all the different offices and the people who participate in the building here. Only authorized persons after hours. So during normal business hours, it's reasonable that you'll bring people by and not give us notice or anything like that. We want you to, more than it's reasonable. We would love it if you're always introducing new volunteers or students or just community members to the space. That's awesome. But if it's before or after normal business hours, if we're not here during normal business hours and you are here with a friend, that's okay. It's reasonable for you to expect that we would be here. But if it's like, 7 a.m. and we show up and there's somebody here with a friend, and they hadn't let us know, then that would be grounds for dismissal. All I want though is an email. You don't even need a confirmation back, just an email that says, hey, I want to have a guest in the studio, just so we have a record of it. If that guest breaks a rule or makes does anything that we want to that we wouldn't want happening, we would want a record that you knew they would be there. It'll be ultimately your responsibility what your guest does on the site. So if they again break rules, whatever it is, it's as if you broke that rule. So we want to keep that record as a result. Leave the on-air DJ alone outside of the studio door. If the light is red, it means they're recording. Don't go into the studio. If it's green, that's okay. You can knock on the door and wait for them to let you in. I talked about just now that rack, that broadcast equipment rack right next to the studio board. Okay, so these are the pieces that will lead to immediate dismissal from the radio station. However, there are other infractions that you could commit, and those will be treated with a 3-strike warning system, a progressive discipline system, which starts with an in-writing warning. So if I give you a verbal warning, it's just a verbal note to keep in mind. It's not an official warning. And if I do give you a written warning, it'll say on this day at this time, you violated this rule in this way, and your punishment is this, that. The second warning will result in a first 1 to 2 week suspension. So it doesn't have to be for the same type of infraction. It can be for any separate infraction that is subject to the discipline system, but not immediate dismissal. It may be you may get a warning in writing saying that you've violated one of the immediate dismissal rules, and then you're thus receiving a 2 week suspension. A third warning will result in immediate dismissal, and it'll be indefinite. It could be a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. Don't come back, and you'll be told. If you're sanctioned or receive a discipline, then you can appeal to that. If you receive it from staff, generally, I won't just discipline somebody. I'll generally either email, I'll put the decision to the programming committee or the board of directors, depending on what the situation is. So if the programming committee disciplines you, you can appeal to the board of directors or make a case to the programming committee first and then appeal to the board of directors, or you can appeal to the board of directors itself. What could you receive a warning for? The following. So log sheets, we're going to look at what the log sheets look like, but like I said, everything has a number and we have to document everything we do on the air. So we have to complete those forms if we do live content. We have to play enough Canadian content. There are other pieces we have to play every program that we'll go over when we look at our log sheets. So if you don't fulfill these expectations, you could get a warning. Missing a show for 2 weeks without warning. I don't mind if you miss your show, just let me know that you're missing your show. Life happens. Had to drive my cousin to the hospital. my dog started having babies, had to take care of the dog, whatever. As long as you let us know. Being consistently late for your show. You should be about 50 minutes early for your show. We see Bill here. He's about an hour early for his show. Thanks, Bill. Really appreciate it. Not being prepared for a show. So, yeah, we want you to have a plan. If you're coming on air and kind of, not sure what I should do, or what should we talk about? What should we play? I don't know. I haven't thought. Then yeah, you could receive a warning for that. Inadequate quality of programming or broadcast. That doesn't mean it's not as vague as what I just said, not being prepared necessarily, but we're giving you direction, support, help, assistance. If you're ignoring that, then that could be an inadequate quality of programming or broadcast. So, for instance, if you have guests on your show and the guest's mic is always way quieter than yours, and we tell you, hey, it sounds really weird. Yeah, hey, you really need to work on the mic quality that you've got going on there. We can always never hear your guest, and we spend time with you trying to workshop and get more comfortable with the mic placements and how to work with a person to encourage them to do it properly. And it's always the same. You never really try. Then that could be inadequate quality of programming or broadcast. I use an example. Somebody they did their show on a laptop. Their laptop, the audio out jack led to like sounds like interference or weird sounds while they played the music from it. So every song had weird sounds coming out of it that weren't supposed to come from the song. And we said, the programming committee said, use a different piece of equipment to play your music some other way. And they didn't. So they got a warning. That's the kind of thing. Failure to lock the door when you're the last one out of the office. So yeah, we never want to leave the office with nobody in it and just have the door open. The door will lock automatically. All you have to do is close it. If you're in this back studio, the studio 2, and you can't see people coming and going, I would expect that door would be closed. Otherwise, it'd be your responsibility if someone came in and you left it open and they were doing inappropriate things. We're here in Studio 1 right now. We can see people coming and going. That's okay. If we're willing to keep an eye on it, that's great. Otherwise, we can close the door if we're in Studio 1 by ourselves. We won't air inappropriate content without a proper disclaimer. So every individual host is responsible for providing disclaimers for the music they play during their slot, if it's going to include any inappropriate content, which is acceptable if it's subtle content. If you're playing a punk song, the song says something shitty this, shitty that, even maybe a little fuck, it's okay if you precede it with a warning. But that was like really subtle stuff there. If you were to listen to that song, hear the shitty here, and then there was a funk and like whatever. Okay. If you precede that with a disclaimer that says the following content may include some language that might be offensive to some listeners, discretion is advised, that should be acceptable during the daytime. Really subtle stuff like that. The more explicit and challenging the content is, though, after 9 p.m. So like if it's really like, it's like if you were to play Rage Against the Machine, the FUO Won't Do What You Tell Me song, I think it's Killing in the Name of, do you know the one I'm talking about? Yeah. So yeah, you couldn't play that unedited during the day, even with the disclaimer. You could play it after 9 with a disclaimer. You also should be providing after 9, if it's that so explicit that you couldn't play it during the day subtly. Contextualization. Why are we playing this content? So it's not just, okay, they're swearing in this song, and then we play a song about like murdering a country or something. Like, why are we listening to this? Are we studying murderous music? Like, what is the context here? That could be, this song about committing genocide is an interesting study in how music can be a force and not always for good, as I see it. Let's say, like, in fact, here's this example of a really violent song. Very scary. We should be aware of this. Listener discretion is advised. That could be acceptable. Yeah, why are we playing that Rage Against the Machine song without the editing? Yeah. Otherwise we should be finding edited versions. So primarily this is what warnings will come from. You can also get immediate dismissals from the following. So generally speaking, no illegal activity at CIVL or on the air. So that includes promoting illegal activity on air or coordinating illegal activity in the studio, violence, threats, drugs, don't sell them, encourage them. Suggesting of threats are not legal. Some things that we see on social media from politicians these days would be illegal to broadcast because they border on threats. We want to encourage, let's say, musical events. Some of them are not in legal spaces. Let's say some of them are in homes, and those are not legally licensed. So I wouldn't want to be doing a promo on Civil Radio for an event that took place in a private home. But what I would be willing to say is, hey, this band is coming to town. Look it up on the social media, or there's an events calendar you can find it on. I love this artist. They'll be in town, but you're not telling people the address and calling out that space. Similarly for like protests, demonstrations, rallies, things like this, we want to encourage people to participate in direct democracy, raise their voices, exercise free speech, but we want to ensure that they're not violent. So we would never want to say, hey, even if it was a protest against police brutality, let's say, we would never say, show those police who's boss. We would always want to encourage people to be polite, respectful, peaceful, etc. We won't broadcast under the influence of intoxicants. Are you familiar with slander? What does slander mean to you? Or what are you familiar with?
What with
slander?
Yeah.
You are.
Sorry?
Are you familiar with slander?
Well, I've heard the word before. I would assume, isn't that basically bashing a person or a group of people kind of situation?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, you can bash them if you have evidence that you're bashing them for something accurate. But if you don't have that evidence and they are able to show that they lost money or their reputation was harmed, and you can't show that the thing you're complaining about is verified, then you're slandering them. So, yeah, I can say the irresponsible decision to do A, B, and C cost X, Y, and Z amounts, and thus Justin Trudeau is the worst prime minister ever. And if that clip goes viral and leads to like a year's worth of campaigns against Justin Trudeau, saying he's the worst leader ever, and he goes poor trying to get re-election, and then he fails, and then he sues me. Well, as long as A, B, and C are real and they're demonstrable, then whatever what I've said about it is fine. Now, yeah, if I was to say that X politician is, say any horrible thing, you know what I mean? Sex abuser, pedophile, thief, murderer, whatever you want, something bad. And the same circumstances were to play out, if they could show that, well, he was one of the slanderous ones at the start, and there is no evidence to show that this happened, then he could sue me for slander, let's say. So, really the key is to cite sources, to not to be measured where you can, right? We're not here to flame or to necessarily soapbox about politicians or anything like this. We're here to discuss issues. We can share our opinion, we can editorialize, sure, but it should be based on facts, and we should have citations, resources, and sources basically that we can reflect. If we can't share our source, it could be slander. If we can't verify our source, it could be slander. To say, according to TMZ, this celebrity is accused of this thing, is okay as long as TMZ actually says that. It's not what we said, it's what TMZ said. And our opinion about what TMZ said cannot be slanderous because it's nothing to prove or disprove. Swearing. So no individual host or guest will ever swear on the radio. So, the F word, various words for excrement, I guess. Yeah, I'm not too strict. You know, I say goddamn on the air. I'll say I use freaking a lot. But generally body parts as an insult would be a no. The B word, the C word would be no's. Yeah. We'll use appropriate, respectful language. There's the George Carlin list, which I won't read here, but you can look it up if you're interested. I think it's 12 words you can't say on the radio, 10 words you can't say on the radio. We talked about abuse, harassment, and discrimination. We talked about damage to property. We talked about the social media. We talked about critiques of station operation on social media briefly, but also on air goes the same way. No malfunction mentions on air. So, I hate this microphone stand, or I wish the CD player would work. The computer isn't working. Sorry, do better than that. And I think the station should do better. Well, that should have been dealt with before you pressed on the microphone. If you felt so strongly that it would impede your ability to do your show. Sorry. So yeah, stay away from those things. You know, the familiar term people use is apologize for the technical difficulties. I like to tell people not to do that. By the time you've told people that there were technical difficulties and asked for their apology, they may not have noticed that there were technical difficulties until then, so you're just pulling attention to it. 4-letter words, subtle language during daytime if preceded by disclaimer context. We talked about that already. Sarcasm, irony, and satire subject to the same contextualization expectations as the swearing content. We talked about it, so it doesn't mean it only has to be played at certain times. Of course, if they're swearing in it, if there's like really explicit or problematic like imagery, like again, violence or sexual descriptions can be offensive, right? But other than that, for sarcasm, irony, and satire, we just have to contextualize beforehand. It's important to know where this comedy, most of this is comedy, basically, this satire, irony, and sarcasm. Where is it coming from? What perspective is it coming from? I generally refer to the Bernie Sanders impersonator that somebody had on a show. They played a piece or a recording from this guy at a film festival. It was like, or a Jewish theater festival. Bernie Sanders is Jewish. He's a famous Jewish politician. And he was at a Jewish theater festival. The impersonator was doing Bernie Sanders impersonations. So when you're at a Jewish film festival doing Bernie Sanders impersonations, a lot of Jewish jokes. Important to contextualize in advance of that this is a Jewish person at a Jewish theater festival doing Bernie Sanders jokes. It's not people making fun of Jews. Same thing. I mean, yeah, I guess everybody knows Dave Chappelle is black, but he says a lot of things that he would never be able to say if he wasn't black. I wouldn't say not be able to say, but like would be taken very differently from the audiences and from black communities, right? So within that context, yeah, you would want to present that if you're sharing a Dave Chappelle joke or something, or another comedian, you would be disclaiming that, okay, look, this person is making light of cultural circumstances that are relevant to them. No, I don't think there's any like Dave Chappelle's more recent trans stuff. I don't think contextual. Well, yeah, that one's tough. I think you could probably pretty easily contextualize it if you were going to critique it for being uninclusive towards trans people, I guess. If you were trying to use it outside of that context, I would question why, and I would find it hard to defend playing it on the radio, other than to discuss the circumstance of like Dave Chappelle, longtime progressive warrior, finally finding himself on the side of the right wing and critiquing trans rights and whatnot, and talking about that. But so that context is essential. And then here we're playing his comments just to have the reference point while we discuss it. I don't know if you're familiar with the comments that I'm talking about, but he's not he's had very hot takes on trans folk and Jew folk too, more recently, but at the same time also. Spoken word and music shows. So in your music show, you do have to talk for 10% of the time. So in an hour, talk for 6 minutes. If you're doing a demo for 20 minutes, you need 2 minutes of talk. So that can just be, yeah, this is this song. I like this song. Da, 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 da. Or it can be something not to do with the music at all. It can just be content that you bring into it. It's up to you. Telephone calls. We can take telephone calls on the in the studio. We have a phone here and it runs through the board. So you're encouraged to give out the phone number. I'm going to do a call-in show, or I'm going to do a show today where we're going to offer Connects tickets. So I hope people will call in. If you want to, if you do get if you want to put somebody on air, you do have to screen them. Like I said, you're responsible for the people who you put on air. We do have a 10-second delay box. So if somebody who's a guest calls and you screen them and they still start swearing when you put them on air, you can get rid of that pretty easily. So we'll show you how to use that when we do tech training. And then we can, if you're ever going to use phone calls in the future, then we can go over it again and again and make sure you're comfortable with it. And if we receive complaints, then never disagree or argue with the caller, never yell at them, never tell them. Basically, the only thing you should ever tell them is, can you please email info@civl.ca? Sorry to hear your concern. If you do that, no matter what the complaint is, I will always support you to the complainant. And then if we have to discipline on the back end internally, then we'll do that. But we're never going to just throw you under the bus. You're right. This person is the worst radio programmer ever. And of course, the CIVL board will appeal any sanctions or disciplines. board@civl.ca. It's on our website. Questions? Okay, paid advertisements. So, if I'm telling a story about Tim Hortons, or if I'm telling a story about what happened today when I was in line at Tim Hortons, I should be telling the story about what is happening while I was in line waiting for my coffee. What I generally ask people is, do you watch TV? Do you watch sitcoms? Or do you watch Seinfeld or Friends or anything like this? And have you ever in a sitcom or a TV show seen somebody drinking a Pepsi or a Coke?
Not often. No.
No, never? Okay. Well,
sometimes. Yeah.
I'm looking for sometimes.
Yeah.
That's the answer I'm looking for. And the answer I'm trying to give is, and the context I'm trying to give to that is, yeah, Coke or Pepsi paid for them to drink that Coke or Pepsi. And so, we're in a local organization promoting local initiatives. And we do that. But outside of those news and current events updates, like if you're saying, this event is taking place at this place at this day, sure, mention what the location is. But outside of those, we shouldn't just be shouting out local businesses, really. They're for-profit entities. They like it when we mention them on air. Maybe they want to buy advertising from us. But ultimately, if they were nonprofits, so we will offer free everything to nonprofits. Nonprofits don't have to pay for our services, but as a result, for-profits do. The march will start at the Walmarts on Luckakuk Way, or the car drove into the window of the Tim Hortons downtown. There's police tape everywhere. Those are reasonable mentions, but I just love walking by Hardy's Variety every morning on Essendine Avenue. It's just my favorite for-profit business. That would not be appropriate. All advertising. So we can sell advertising. The advertising will go through the station manager. And so you can't just one-off make any or on your own make any decisions to sell or try to advertise on the radio station. But if you do want to engage in it and you engage the station manager and the station manager is able to sell advertising, you will get, as a volunteer or a student, 25%, the opportunity to make 25% commission. So all we need is if you tell me, hey, I think this business may be interested in advertising, and that's all you need to do. If I can sell them advertising, I'll give you 25% of the income we make. But then that said, if you're interested in developing experience in promotions, ad sales, outreach, this kind of thing, like, we can certainly work hand in hand, step by step, in going through the process of locking them down for advertising. Everything from making an initial contact with them to invoicing them after the fact. So yeah, that opportunity is there. But that's about paid advertising. Spoken word shows, news and opinion. We want to be balanced. We want to be unbiased if we can. Everybody is biased though, and there's no true balance really. What we talk about, so I mean, I don't know if I hope UFV media communications classes will cover these types of topics, and I'm pretty sure they do, but like, so balance is not both sides have both, the story has two sides. That is not necessarily balance. It can be when it is a two-sided story, but like, for instance, climate change is not a two-sided story. It is not a story where, some scientists are worried the climate is heating or changing too rapidly as a result of industrial operations. Others don't. Who is right? Like, that is not legitimate journalism. It is very well documented that 99% of scientists believe in climate change, and there's a percent of scientists who are known as junk scientists who are paid for by corporations to do research to disagree with climate science, so that corporations can argue that it's not 100% sure, and politicians cannot. It is 100% sure. Climate change is happening, and populations are being impacted. To find balance on that topic is not simply to find somebody who disagrees with climate change's existence. That's a complete disservice to covering climate change, I think. So we have to find other ways to be balanced and other ways to provide opposition to our perspectives. Maybe it's about a solution to climate change. Somebody thinks this is a good solution. Well, here's somebody who critiques that solution. That's how peer review works generally in the academia. Is that it's not people saying you're wrong, it's people bringing up other perspectives that are trying to bolster and broaden the discussion and make the argument that's coming out of here even stronger by dealing with a bigger problem with it. So that's a big piece of news and opinion, is the balanced side. Religious and political broadcasts. So we want to educate and inform about religion, its tenets, its history, its cultural makeup. In politics, the same thing, where these different perspectives or schools of thought are coming from. What we don't want to do is solicit or for membership or money for any organization that's religious or political. We don't want anybody listening to feel like my religion is wrong, this religion is, or you're telling me that my religion is wrong, or telling me that your religion is right and mine is wrong. And the same for politics, which is a difficult thing to do, especially when we're talking about opinion and editorialism about politics. Nobody believes in politics and thinks that the opposite opinion is right. Otherwise, they wouldn't be arguing the opinion they do think. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't alienate people who don't 100% agree with this? That's the challenge. And it's something that I think all of us are constantly working on. I don't think anybody's worked this out whatsoever. But what we want to make sure is when there's election period, CIVL does all candidates debates for every municipal, federal, provincial election. And we try to do it for the student union too, but they're not very cooperative. But what we can't do is interview or platform one specific candidate, but not their opposition. So every candidate in a given race has to be given the equal opportunity to reflect their perspective while we're in the campaign period. If it's before the campaign period and one person's declared, then technically there's nothing to stop you from having them on every day and nobody else. But once the campaign period starts, we have to be equal to all the different candidates. They don't have to accept, we just have to offer the equal opportunity. Now, if they didn't accept to participate, we would have to present a perspective that reflects not just the one politician. No, that would be our responsibility. But so in order to make that a little more functional, the station will organize all candidates debates. And then after those all candidates debates, anybody who doesn't participate, that's up to them not to participate. We'll organize it in a way where everybody has the ability to say, hey, this doesn't work, I'd like to do it on a different date. If they don't want to, that's fine. But after those all candidates debates, then we'll encourage individual volunteers to interview specific politicians if they want. And then we'll make sure that if they're not interviewing all the politicians in that race, we're at least having other volunteers interview the other politicians in that race. Otherwise, we'll make sure that they're getting more people on. Log sheets. So where did I pull up the log sheet? Oh, it's in the email here. Right. Okay, so log sheets. Every program will fill out a log sheet. They're in a tray right outside of this studio right here. But they also are available in digital format. Pretty straightforward. Program name. If you host a show, the program will have a name. It'll have a time that it starts and a time that it ends every episode. It'll have a host. That's going to be you. If it's not in English, then we'll write the language here. If it's English, we'll leave it. Relevant log number refers to those categories we talked about earlier. So if it's simply a spoken word show, then 12 spoken word is your log number. If it's a news show, 11 is your log number. If it's a news and spoken word show, 11/12. This is formatted kind of weird. Everything under brief program description here should be just on the second page. So this is usually the top of this page, but music log numbers also, like we talked about. So we talked about generally the category 2 is for popular music. And so these 21 through 24 are the popular music categories. 24 is easy listening. 23 is acoustic. 22 is country oriented. And 21 is pop, rock, and dance. So you can see it covers every single possible piece of music that you could ever want. And there's no need for additional categories. Thank God. So obviously I'm very sarcastic there. Didn't give you the disclaimer. Pop, rock, and dance is every genre under the sun you can think of. So like hardcore metal, pop, rock, dance. Experimental hip hop, any type of hip hop, pop, rock, dance. Experimental bleeps and bloops, like drone music, pop, rock, dance. It's all under pop, rock, dance. 31 is concert music, like symphonies. 32 is folk and folk oriented. So folk music's 32. 33 is world beat. So international music. 34 is jazz and blues, and 35 is non-classical religious. Like I said, every genre under the sun right there, taken care of. Don't worry about it anymore. So if our show is in one of these types of genres as a music show, then we would just fill out one of those numbers in the log number form. If there are multiple, we can choose one / the other. Source, if not CIVL, yeah, if you imported the show from somewhere else, if it's syndicated, we would fill it out here. Day, month, year. Day, month, year. And you can keep track of your episodes if you want. Feel free. The rest of the sheet is, or the middle part of the sheet at least, is broken down into first hour and second hour. So if you only have a 1 hour show, then you don't worry about this right side here. But if you do have 2 hours, you'll use both the left and the right side. And so it shows us all the different pieces we need during a program. So it shows us station IDs, we need 3 of them in 1 hour. PSAs, we need 2 of them. Promos, we need 2 of them. Show promos, we need 2 of them. We'll talk about what each of these are later on. But basically we have pre-recorded versions of all of these. They have titles. So if you were to play one on your show, you would write the title and you would write the time. And here's the log number. It tells us what the log number is. If we were to do it live, you would write live, and then you would write the time here. If you had a pre-recorded show and you were allowing our automated broadcast software to fill in all the files in the appropriate circumstances, then you'll write Sam, because that's the name of our broadcaster, Sam Broadcaster, just so happens to be. And that'll also include the data of the history, the titles and the times. So you would just write it that it's Sam, and then not fill it in yourself. But if you're hosting a show live, yeah, you would have to complete each one of these pieces. So there are 9 pieces here. To do a station ID live, we have the instructions down here below. Oh, this is just slightly too old a log sheet. So in the new log sheets, what they show is that your station identification has to include the call sign, CIVL, the frequency, which is 101.7 and 92.3 now, broadcasting from UFV, and serving the Fraser Valley. is basically where we go with that. And then we also, at the very top of the show, we have to give a territory acknowledgement. Currently, the language says unceded traditional Stolo territory. That language will be changed. I'll be doing a territory acknowledgement workshop next week, and then we'll update these the log sheet to reflect it, because the log sheet does now have the territory acknowledgement at the bottom, the slightly updated version from this. But I think it's basically we're gonna acknowledge that we are on Stalo Tamak, and that is what the updated acknowledgement I expect to be. So the 3 station IDs, yeah, and then the PSA's promos and show promos. If you don't want to use our pre-recorded ones, you can just come up with relevant items to include here, and by the end of this session we'll talk about what those relevant items look like exactly. Here it says time start and time end for your talk time. So the idea is every time you talk about a song, let's say, or have an interview, you say at 4:02 I started to talk, at 4:06 I finished. Log number here, 12 for spoken word. Do the same thing on the right side. The second hour, you need to fill out these pieces, fill out this time. And yeah, here it asks, did your show start on time? Was the studio in a decent shape when you arrived? Did you leave it in good shape? We've updated this yes and no's. Basically now it includes the station ID, the territory acknowledgement. And I think that's actually it on the new sheet. Is there one like right here? No. You only have to give the full station ID. Sorry, I missed this once. The other 2 times you could just be like CIVL Radio. But once an hour, we have to give the full station ID. And at the top of our show, we have to give the territory acknowledgement. You can give more station IDs and acknowledgements if you like. Here we'll say out of how many Canadian songs, from how many total songs, what was the percentage of Canadian content? Same thing for hits here. How many top 40s out of how many songs? What's the percentage? This should be over 35 most of the time, at the very least over 7. And this should be over 10. Under 10. How much time did I talk in hour 1? How much time did I talk in hour 2? How much total talk time for my 2-hour show if I had a 2-hour show? Here's the music portion. We write artist, song. So artist in the first column, song in the second song in the second column. Like I said, this sheet is formatted weird here. And if it's a new album within the last 6 to 8 months, put the album here, and then it can be charted as new music in our charts and on the Earshot charts. Put the log number here as well, whatever the log number lines up with in the log number all. And then over here, we ask CHNI, and the legend here tells us it's Canadian, hit, new, or instrumental. So we have to circle one that's relevant. Basically, this is all what's expected by the government. It's what we have to fill out with every program. Questions about the form?
No, makes sense.
Okay. And so yeah, fill out everything unless it's Sam Broadcaster. Go over the log numbers, yeah, talk time, CanCon and hits, fill out the backside. Log numbers, CHNI, and yeah, there's a tray outside of the studio to fill that in when you're done. Okay, basically, second last thing we talk about here is the demo. So if you want to host a program, you'll have to complete the demo. And the demo will have to look exactly like this. So when we say exactly, we really do mean exactly. So it's expected, like, I don't know if you have, you probably have a ruler at home, but you're going to need like a protractor and a compass probably too. Like these are pretty round. If it's going to look exactly like this, you'll need I'm joking. Yes, I do this every time. Has to look exactly like this.
I don't believe in you so far.
I know I do a pretty deadpan. Protractors and compass. I just want to be able to bring up protractors and compasses, really is what it is. But yeah, no, it needs to look exactly. It does need to look exactly like this. I wasn't joking. It needs to be exactly 20 minutes long. no longer, no shorter, not 11:58, not 1956, not 20:04. And at 10 minutes, we're showing that we want to give our station ID, our PSA, and our promo. That's a break, we consider it. It has to be at 10 minutes, not at 9:50, not at 10:05, at 10 minutes. We want to see that you're meeting the time expectations here. And we want you to record this all at once. This is not going to be pre-recorded and edited. You're going to do this in 20 minutes. So you're going to prepare, what is my 20-minute program demo going to look like? Just like you're going to prepare what's your 60-minute program going to look like in the future, but you're going to prepare it down to the timing of the second, basically. And there are ways you can do it so it can be fluid enough that you'll be flexible so that you can still hit the 10-minute mark without being like a robot throughout the first 10 minutes of content. But ultimately, what we'll ask you to put together is a station identification. So CIVL 101.7 and 92.3 from UFE Abbotsford, serving the Fraser Valley, including Chilliwack. And introduce your show. You do this ID plus the territory acknowledgement. Let's say it's Stalo Tamak or unceded traditional solo territory, either or for now. ID, acknowledgement, and intro, 5 W's. Who, what, where, why, and when. So I think of the ID as the where, and the who, what, where on the frequency, 101.7, 92.3, where in the valley from Abbotsford, serving the valley. Here, who, what, why, when. Who, my name is Aaron. What, this is Aaron's show. Why, today on Aaron's show, we're going to talk of, it's Wednesday at 3. Chill, enjoy, thanks. So you can do your intro, and it can be as quick as like 10, 15 seconds, really. And then you have the full 10 minutes to host whatever kind of content is yours to host. As long as leading up to 10 minutes, you're fading out your music or you're wrapping up your conversation so that you can do your break at 10 minutes. You can either use the pre-recorded versions of these IDs, PSAs, and promos that we have, or you can just quickly make up your own. Alien time in Abbotsford, that's my first PSA. Alien promo, that's my second PSA. And then host content till the 20-minute mark. At the end, you give a station ID and a show promo, which is just to shout out the next show. And you can make up the Alien show up next. Thanks for listening. 20 minutes, done. So that's your demo. If you wanted, let's say, if you're doing a spoken word program and you wanted like a long form interview, you could like record an interview in advance and play it as if it were a song. So let's say you did like a 12-minute interview and you cut up 2 different 6-minute segments of that interview. You could live do an ID, an intro, a territory acknowledgement, talk about what you're going to talk about on the show, then say, okay, now let's listen to this interview. Press play on the interview, record it into the software. Then when the interview's done, oh wow, listening to that interview was interesting. This is how I felt about it. And now we're going to go to our break, and then come back from the break, and then okay, yeah, that was a good break. Now we're going to listen to the second part of that interview, so that you're administering it as if you were live, even though you pre-recorded the interview. So that's an option if you want. Really, what we're looking for is you can watch the timing. There's no dead air, and that the levels are decent between the different things that you do on the air. So it's a demonstration that you can both plan your time, program accordingly, and use the equipment effectively. Cool. And so 20 minutes, no more, no less. You can use the pre-recorded interviews as I described, but it must include the station ID, CIVL 101.7, have to include 92.3 from Abbotsford, serving the Fraser Valley. 5 W's for the intro of your program. Give us the details, mind the levels, no dead air, 10-minute break, PSA promo, and an ID. It doesn't have to be a 1-minute promo. It said 1-minute promo there. At the 20-minute mark, give the final ID and intro the next show. You can make it up if you want. What are promos, PSAs, and IDs? Any idea?
Promo would be probably just that, promoting a business or an organization or something like that.
Yeah, so well, if we were promoting a business, we'd make it an ad. So for a promo, it's any event. Oh. Basically, it's got an expiry date by maybe it's Thursdays, or maybe it's every Thursday at this place, or maybe it's submissions are due on Wednesday, or maybe it's come by on Saturday. It has a date associated with it or a time associated with it. Fair enough. Every day at noon, tune in for this could could be a promo.
Mhm.
Public service announcements don't have times or dates associated. They're just general information. So, everybody has to register with the aliens before next Thursday is a promo. Make sure don't look the aliens in the eye is a PSA. And a promo, the show promo ad for another CIVL show. So if you do have a show, when you put together your show and you're ready for air, you'll give us like a 30 or 60 second, hey, this is my show. I'm on these times. Listen. And then other people have to play 2 of those for other shows during their show. You have to play 2 of them for other people's during your show. I think we're done. So at this point, if you're watching online, send an email to info@civl.ca with volunteer training in the subject line, and we'll connect on next steps.